Decades ago, Peter Drucker came up with a concept called the knowledge worker. So we're going to transition here a little bit. The knowledge worker. And I remember when I read about this the first time, I thought, oh, knowledge worker, what's that? And he said, well, we're shifting away from manual workers and into knowledge workers. So people aren't sitting around anymore, just making brake parts for cars. Now we're doing things like being managers and building these technical systems and becoming architects. And as our culture becomes more successful and we all have food and housing and all of these other things, our abilities can be put to use meeting our higher needs. Well, it's become a trend, became a tidal wave, and now almost everyone, almost all the people in this room anyway, especially, are knowledge workers. Everyone in Western society almost is a knowledge worker in one way or another. They work with their minds. And what Peter Drucker talked about is that knowledge workers create opportunity, but they also create the potential for some very dangerous downsides, in that if you've got someone sitting there making the brake parts, you can come in and you can say, how many brake parts did you make today? And they can say, I made 23 brake parts. And you can look over at the next person and go, how many brake parts did you make? And they say, I made 27 brake parts. And you can look at the next person, and how many brake parts? I made 25. How many brake parts? I made 4. Something's wrong. Knowledge workers, it's not so easy, because you can't look at their brake parts all the time. Knowledge work, as Peter Drucker says, is defined by results. Knowledge work is defined by the result that it creates. And so the ability to find stars who are great knowledge workers that can not only work with knowledge, but then turn it into results is a little bit bigger challenge. And this undergirds or underpins the importance even more of finding stars, of learning how to recognize when someone just is a star. That's who they are, is a star. And they have these qualities that we're going to talk about outside of, I type 47 words per minute, and I am trained in Microsoft Office and whatever else, but the intrinsic motivation and the aspirations and the abilities and all of these kinds of the passion, that stuff. Brad Smart, who wrote the book Top Grading, who I mentioned before, probably the smartest guy maybe that's ever lived in the area of recruiting and interviewing and hiring. He talks about this notion of A players, B players, and C players. And he says some interesting things about C players, and the more I've thought about it, and the more I've looked around at it, I went, wow, he really gets something here. A C player, right, an underperformer, someone that's just not right for that role, maybe not intrinsically motivated person who's not in it for the excellence and to be great. C players not only don't perform, they don't not only deliver results that are poor, but they also turn A players into B players and C players. And they are like A player repellent. If an A player comes into your business and looks around and sees a bunch of C players, it's like, that is not where I want to be. And in fact, I've watched in our own business as we've gone through, many different cycles and ups and downs, and we've had our challenges. I mean, this has been quite a ride so far, and I'm sure it's only going to get more interesting. But when there's a C player interacting with some A players, the drama is just unbelievable. The A players are freaking out. They're like, this person's not performing. Like, we got to do something. This is a bottleneck. They're in our way. We can't get stuff done. So be very careful, because if you hire someone that's a C player and you bring them on your team, or you keep them, they're going to turn A players into B and C players, and they're going to scare away the other A players. So this is a little bit of an all or nothing. Does that make sense to say a little bit of an all or nothing thing? That didn't quite line up right there. But you might consider this, you might turn up the all or nothing dial on this one and really make a commitment to just go for stars. That's it. That's my commitment. Only stars. Another interesting thing about stars that I've found is that stars multiply each other. You remember I mentioned in the example before, I used the example of, to me, one type of profit is if you put two stars together and they work together long enough that they get that broadband connection and they know how to work together. They have it. And now they've got the ball and they can work as a team. That can be profit all by itself. Well, if you take one star and you connect them to another star, I don't think you just get 2x. I think this is a 1 + 1 = 3 effect. But then, if you introduce another star into the mix and you connect it up, well, then something very interesting happens. Because now the 3 turns into like 6. And it's almost as if you're invoking the network effect. And they're having a multiplying effect on each other. And when you keep stacking one star on top of another, and then putting them together and turning them loose so that they can interact with each other and they can get to know each other and they can find out each other's strengths, each other's weaknesses, they can fill in the gaps for each other, they can communicate well, and then they start connecting up with each other. It is an amazing and beautiful thing to see happening. I read an article, I don't know, a year ago or so, about MySpace, which is kind of one of these internet massive successes. And it was by one of the founders, and he said something in the article kind of offhanded, and as soon as I saw it, I said, there we go. And what he said is, the management team at MySpace, we had worked together for 8 years before MySpace came along. And it just turned out that one of their little web properties over here, some guy put up this little networking site based around music to promote his band or something, and built it and kind of took off, and they went, hey, let's be smart enough to know we're getting lucky. And they went over there and they said, let's pay attention to this thing. And they took their management team that had been working together for 8 years, and they blew up the opportunity. So I believe that stars amplify each other. I think that they multiply each other's power. And there's a little bit of the network effect that happens when they do that. So the qualities of a star, in my view, are number one, they're a driver. Driver. This is the most important quality of a star, in my opinion. It's also a quality that you don't see talked about in hiring books, interviewing books, especially not the way that I'm going to talk about it here. If you think of this spectrum or this continuum here, and on this end we have what I call a passive, I want to write this down, passive, aggressive, reactive, and this whole zone over here is the reactive zone. And then over on this end of the spectrum, we have what I call a driver. And this would be the proactive zone. If you've ever heard me talk about this, a passive-aggressive reactive person, this is the most difficult and annoying type to deal with if you're a successful entrepreneur, is the person that not only needs to be extrinsically motivated and techniqued and forced into doing what they need to do, but they're resistant about it. They're passive-aggressive. And the example that I like to use is just about any person that I've met working in any department of motor vehicles office, for some reason, it's that attitude of, yes, I realize that we told you that there was no wait when you called, and yes, I realize you've been sitting here for 2.5 hours, but I'm going to have this job until they put me in the box, and there's nothing you can do about it. And if you even hint, if you even try to push me, I will lose your paperwork, and you will be hosed. You know that great feeling you get when you run into that person? That's the passive-aggressive reactive. It's the extreme end. Hopefully you don't have any of those, although a lot of businesses do. Anybody ever met one of those? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, good. And then this is the reactive zone, anywhere from kind of right in the middle on the balance over to passive-aggressive reactive. These are reactive folks. They need to have someone tell them what to do so that they can react to it. My estimate is this is 80 to 90% of people that I meet in business. 80 to 90%. It's not scientific, just my own personal estimate. 80 to 90%. Which means that only 10 to 20% of people are proactive, which means they show up and they say to you, I'm done with that other thing, what can I do next? I've been experiencing someone who's a very proactive person on my team for the last several days here, and that's Den. Those binders that you're looking at and the beautiful designs that you're seeing there, Den and Farmer have been doing some amazing work there, but you have Den largely to thank for creating all that design. And one of the things that's amazing about Den is that at these breaks, I'm back behind the stage hiding and getting ready for the next thing, and Den is finding me and saying, is there anything else you need? Is there anything else? Figuring out how to slip in between the cracks to give me a quick update. We've got that other thing done. Behind the scenes, we've got this. What can I do next? Proactive. I actually have to say to Den sometimes, just find something to do for a few minutes. That's what you want. You want someone that's so proactive that you actually have to say to them on a regular basis, just go keep yourself busy, do some other stuff, take a break, have a Coke. I wish I could tell Den to take a break during this program, but we got a lot of work to do. A driver is someone who takes personal responsibility for things. They have a sense of personal responsibility. They also have a sense of a result instead of work, right? So instead of just effort and time, whatever, it's the result we're trying to get to. Remember I said Peter Drucker says knowledge work is defined by the result? Well, drivers, they just somehow intuitively get that. This is all about the result. And when you put those two together, you get this kind of abstract thing called owning the result. They own the result. And you can feel them owning the result. They just say, well, what are we trying to do? And then they say, okay, I got it. I got the ball. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to deliver that result. And you realize that the monkey has climbed onto their back and they've got it. And they're like, we're in this until the job is done. I got the ball on this one. You'll know pretty quickly when you hire someone if they're a driver or not, if you interact with them. One of the things that I recommend, we'll talk a little bit about later, is get daily updates from people when they start, watch how they communicate, interact with you. If someone hasn't proven to you that they're a driver within the first 30 days, you probably made a bad choice. You should probably suck it up, say thank you very much, and get on to the next thing. You need someone that finishes things up and shows back up and says, okay, what's next? And that takes personal responsibility for delivering a result. Very important. Another quality that I look for, personal and professional aspirations. You can find out if someone has aspirations by asking them, where do you want to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? My favorite question is, where do you want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? To get a few data points so I can see the curve of what their aspirations are. If you just ask someone, where do you want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? It will tell you so much, because what a lot of people, most people will answer is, well, I'd like to be making at least $50,000 in a year, And in 3 years, I'd like to be at 65. And at 5 years, wow, if I could be at 75,000 in 5 years, that would be great. Now, is that someone that has aspirations? They're there, right? They aspire to a high level, but just think about what they're saying. The type of person that I look for is the person that says, well, in a year, what I'd like to do is have learned enough so I could manage my own team, so that in 3 years, I could start my own company and then do this whole thing. And then in 5 years, I want to be at, $100 million. Now, that might be a little bit too type E entrepreneur, but that's my kind of person, right? Someone that sees how strategically, how the different steps that they're taking are going to be fitting into the future. And they're talking about things that they want to learn, skills that they want to get, how they want to work with other people. One of the things that you'll find with stars is that learning and development is more important than money. Far more important, in fact, because their stars think long term. And they know that if they just take money and they don't learn anything, that they're going to wake up in 5 years and not be able to make more money. So they want the learning. They want to develop. I mentioned emotional and social intelligence. It's not important for all roles, but I'm just throwing that out there. They're going to interact with a lot of other people, and sometimes you've got a function in your business where it's just a person who is super introverted and they just need to kind of be alone doing their thing. Maybe it's some computer programming role and they don't really need to deal with other people that much and they can communicate with other super technology, friendly people. Fine, they can be a star. But if you're going to grow a big successful company, they're probably going to have to interact with other people. And it may not be a problem now, but later down the road, it will manifest and you'll realize. The next one that I talk about that it's a little unusual, it's a little weird to describe, but I call it millionaire next door sensibilities. Thomas Stanley wrote the book several years ago called The Millionaire Next Door. And what he did is he kind of blew open this idea. Most of us think of millionaires as a millionaire is someone that lives a lavish lifestyle and lives in a big mansion up on the hill and drives a fancy car and goes out every night and is like in People magazine in the socialite section. And what Thomas Stanley found out is that's not true. Most rich people drive used American, well, in America this is, we've got an international audience here, but drive 10-year-old used American-made cars, and they live in old established neighborhoods in modest homes, and they dress conservatively. And this is most people that have a lot of money. And when I was a little younger, I was always impressed by people that were flashy, and I wanted to someday be able to be successful so I could be flashy too. And I went through a couple of little phases where I was a little bit more flashy. But I started realizing that people that are super flashy, that's what they're in it for, are often very much big hat, no cattle types. That there's really nothing inside there. They don't really have the goods, so to speak. And that a star often doesn't broadcast it and say, I am the best you are ever going to meet. They just deliver results. They love doing it. They get the job done. And in a lot of cases, these are very family-oriented people. I mean, you can't discriminate based on familial status, and you wouldn't want to do that, but I've just noticed that they're very connected to their families. It's an important thing to have good relationships with families, friends. They're just in it for the long haul. And so they do things like save. They think about their career strategically, where they're going to get to the next level. And they figure out how to make the thing that they're doing now a win for the long run. Now, spending all the money that you're making on flashy things and going and leasing a really expensive car because that's all the car payment that you've got instead of just buying the less expensive one for cash. If a person's going to do that themselves, how do you think they're going to behave with your money? How do you think they're going to make decisions? So I call it millionaire next door sensibilities because that's the best way I have of describing it. And I've got a lot of friends that are, people that are younger than me, even people I've known in their late teen years who I just say, you are going to be a success rock star in your future. I can tell because you're staying lean and you're staying conservative and you're making money and you're growing, but you're not just going out and blowing it immediately. You're just being cool with it. You're doing it to learn how to do it and how to get it. So if someone's flashy, be careful. Be very careful. And if someone is not all that impressive, when you meet them and you're not like, wow, this is the coolest person I've ever met, don't kind of discount them. Say, let's see what the work looks like. I read that Robert Half talks about making the mistake of thinking that a good interviewer will be a good worker. Interviewing well is a skill. Producing results is a skill. They are not the same skill. They are very, very different. Another thing that Warren Buffett said, he said it's simple. I work with people that I like, admire, and trust. I like, admire, and trust. Ask people what they're not good at. I like to ask people, so what are some of the things you're not that good at? What are your weaknesses? And then listen and pay careful attention. Listen between the words. If you say, what's your weakness? My favorite response is, well, I guess I'd just have to say that I'm too much of a perfectionist. You mean you don't have any weaknesses, no problems? You don't screw a particular type of thing up over and over and over? I don't think so. Danger. And another thing that I look for that is, I've never seen this mentioned anywhere, but it seems so obvious, it took me years to figure this one out, is work with people that love business. I didn't say that love money, I said that love business. That see business as a fun game to play, a place where they can develop, create results, work with other great people, evolve. And I like to ask questions like, what do you like about business? I know it's a profound one, right? Asking someone, what do you like about business, will tell you a lot. Most people will say something like, never really thought about that. Well, I guess I like having a steady job. I like that about business. Some people are very interested in business. They're fascinated by it. They love figuring out all the models and all the paradigms and how things work. And I think that those are the people that you want to find. People that love and really enjoy business. Here's what I'd like you to do. Put a star next to the idea that you got that you can implement immediately. Maybe even write down a little one-line action plan. So you should be looking at this document, your star profile. The key traits to look for when recruiting stars for your team aren't typically mentioned in books and trainings on interviewing and hiring. Some of these traits include being a driver, being highly networked, being emotionally and socially intelligent, having millionaire next door sensibilities, having passion and aspirations, having a strong personal passion about business. In addition to these traits, identify any other traits and qualifications needed for the specific role you're considering. What I'd like you to do right now is to just take a few minutes and ask yourself, what are some traits that you should describe explicitly, that you should say out loud, that you should make part of the dialogue inside of your business? What are the traits that you're looking for in another person that are musts? You have to have them if you're going to hire them. What are those traits? And create what I call your star profile. I've given you some of ours, the most important ones. Maybe you have a few to add. And then, in the box below, if you're thinking of a particular role, you can add some more specific traits to that box. So you've got your general traits you'll use for everyone, and then you've got your specific traits. So your general traits, you might take 3 or 4 from our list, from our star profile, and you might add a couple of more. One of your traits might be they just have to be super outgoing and friendly, because everyone in your business is, and everything you're ever going to do is going to involve that, so they must be unbelievably gregarious and social. Maybe that's just one of your star profile traits, has to be that way. Or maybe you're looking to hire someone that has very specialized technical expertise and experience, and they need to have a few specific traits that are musts. And it's a good idea to write those down so that you've explicitly said them and you know what you're looking for. So take about 5 minutes right now and just brainstorm through your mind and say, okay, where have I made mistakes? Where have I learned some lessons? What are some things that I need to avoid in the future? What are the traits that I need to find in a star? And make yourself a little star profile. Even if you steal our traits and you just rewrite them and you pick the ones that you like, I'd like you to make a commitment to yourself and to your business that you're only going to hire stars and that you're only going to hire people that have these traits. Okay, make that commitment to yourself. We'll take a few minutes with this exercise. Go. So during this first phase of our business's growth, one of the things that kind of hit me was that I wasn't a good manager. In fact, I'm probably one of the world's worst because I'm just not naturally very organized. I'm not a naturally organized, structured person. I like to be free and creative and have all my time free and have a lot of flexibility. So what I did is I started asking team members who came to work with me to send me daily updates. And I started saying, maybe I need to find people who can manage themselves. There's a great saying that I heard, I don't remember where it came from, but it's hire people that need to be led, not people that need to be managed. And the implication is to hire people that can manage themselves. Even if you find a person that's a super creative type, that's all over the map and not very organized, they can still get an update out to you every day at the end of the day. And it's very simple. You just say, hey, will you do me a favor? At the end of every day, take 5 minutes. If you're taking more than 10 minutes to do this, you're doing something wrong. So take 5 minutes, send me a daily update. And in the daily update, I want you to put 3 things. Number 1, what you did that day and the results that you got. Somebody just said that's 2. Hopefully, it should be 1. 2 ways of describing the same thing. Number 2, problems or challenges. And number 3, questions that you have for me. What you do, results you got, problems and challenges, questions. And just read those every day. Just read them every day. Put your finger on the pulse. And there's something that happens inside of humans when you see a consistent reporting of real-time information. You start to become attuned to that other process. And very important, very important. You can learn who someone is very quickly. The next thing that was very important, and I actually started this from the beginning, I had learned earlier from studying some other systems, is to track all the important numbers in your business on a visual chart every day. Chart all the numbers on a chart every day. I'll give you some a little bit later in the program to chart, but chart at least 5 numbers every day. And these can be things like incoming leads, your conversion rates, average sale price, total sales, deposits, expenses, that kind of stuff. These days you can log into a computer terminal and see just about any of it, no matter what kind of business you have. And if you can't, you should probably automate that thing so you can. The visual display of quantitative information is one of the true miracles of business. And then the last thing is daily meetings to keep important projects on track. We did this in the early days. We stopped doing it for a couple of years, and actually for Altitude, we picked it back up for a while. Originally, we called this our noon call, and this was, back in the business when I'm estimating now when we had between 6 and 15 people, or I don't remember how many people were on the team. Every day at noon, we got on the phone and quickly go over what we're up to, what we're trying to do. And for me, this project was very intense, and we did daily calls for a while. Every day, we just get on the phone, quick, where's everyone at? Connect, what are we all trying to do? Boom, we're off. So daily meetings on important projects, fast. We're not getting together to have a committee meeting and try to have a group decision on every process and everything we're trying to do. We're getting together to coordinate. Coordinate. What does coordinate mean? I think Nietzsche said, life is a process of constantly reorienting oneself in a world of total uncertainty. Life is a process of constantly reorienting oneself in a world of total uncertainty. So when you coordinate, you figure out what the other person's location is, where they're at in relationship to yours, and you become more efficient. And when you're working with stars, someone says, okay, I made progress on this, and you say, okay, so I can see you're going to be done with that in probably 2 or 3 days, so I'm going to have to do this. Broadband communication. The more communication, the better inside your business. So those daily meetings to just go over what's happening. And lately, in our meetings, this is something that came from Rob Kelly that he recommended, and we've been doing it now for a while, is each person, when they share what they have to share, they then say, here are my top 3 priorities right now. Boom, here are my top 3 priorities. And when everyone says that, at the end of, you can just have a 5-minute meeting and say, what are your top 3 priorities? You just know where everyone's at. It really is interesting. What are your top 3 priorities? Very powerful. It's now integrated into just about everything we do. So we've already got someone who is in the running for Mr. Speed of Implementation Altitude-07. Took the, well, I'll let him tell you the story. Where you at? Right here? He came over to me like around lunch and he said, man, I went and took this idea and implemented it. And I said, all right, well, what's going on? And he came over to me right before the break and gave me, or right after the break, and gave me a little update. Just talk a little bit about it.
I'm Jason Moffitt, live down the road, San Diego. And he was talking about the quick speed of implementation. And I'm the kind of guy who has a lot of ideas, way too many ideas, and I don't get a lot of them done. So I kind of felt bad, like I was maybe taking myself a little bit away from the content, but I really quick just made a blog. I'm in the poker market, and the biggest frustration people have in that market, it's mostly men with huge egos that have a huge problem admitting that they're losing. Everybody's breaking even. And they all blame the guy sucking out on the river, which is basically someone who's in an inferior position, maybe was a 1 to 20 dog, should have never been the hand, and he wins. So people only remember that instance. It's like, oh, he sucked out on me, and they're hitting stuff, and I've done it too, but they don't remember everything else. So this is the problem, is suck out. So I registered a domain, suckoutsteve.com. And I just made a quick blog really quick, forward from GoDaddy straight over to SuckoutSteve. Did a quick post about, I feel your pain. It's not your fault. This stuff happens all the time. I used to hate poker. I almost quit until I learned this one crucial skill of how to punish these guys who were sucking out on me. And so I just sent out an email, right then when I did it. And in hindsight, too, Suck Out Steve is not that great because in the spam filter in Aweber, they think you're sending porn. Huh. But it's just good that I did something. It's better than not doing anything. So, I don't know if Suck Out Steve is going to be my avatar or not, but I sent it out. About maybe, I think 175 people had opened the email so far, and there was 7 sales for like $212 so far. So first sale came in at 4 o'clock today.
There's some speed of implementation for you. That's what I'm talking about. Suck out Steve, huh? That's the first thing that came to mind. If you can't describe what you are doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. W. Edwards Deming. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you are doing. Most people who are successful don't even know why, in my opinion. They don't know why. They've got a great story that they tell themselves and other people. They don't really know. Most people that are great at doing things are horrible at teaching the thing that they do. Why? Because they don't know what they're doing. They're just good at it. It's just naturally, they're good at it. These types tend to like to write books, too, which can be a problem. W. Edwards Deming was very, very influential on my thinking, someone who was referred to me by my mentor, Jerry, who I mentioned earlier. And for a couple of years, I was very into his stuff. And Deming had an interesting story. Deming was a statistician who studied under a guy that worked for Bell Labs, who brought statistics to business. And he really, really took to this idea of applying statistical methods, particularly to manufacturing. And what he did is he went in and he said, well, instead of just accepting what comes out, is there a way to use math and statistics and some of these kind of higher level things that we're figuring out to make manufacturing better, to make it more profitable, to make companies work better? And as he developed over the years and over the decades, he started to realize that a lot of this was about people and the way you treated people. And America, right after the World War II, late 40s and early 50s, America was riding high. I mean, we had just destroyed the rest of the world, essentially, and everyone needed to buy all of our exports, and you could make anything and make a lot of money, so we didn't need a lot of advice in manufacturing. So he went over to Japan. They were very open to his ideas because their country was destroyed, and they're trying to rebuild. And the companies invited him in and used his statistical methods. And, I'm stylizing and paraphrasing the whole story, but they used his statistical methods. And a lot of people think that he was largely responsible for them rebuilding their country. Deming. Well, after doing that for a couple of decades over there, America, which was starting to slow down a little bit, and especially car manufacturing companies, said, hey, maybe you could come over here and do some of that stuff over here. And he went to work with Ford when Donald Peterson was running the show over there and helped them launch some amazing successes. He was around when they launched the Ford Escort, which became the best-selling car in the country, and the Taurus, and other big hits. And he worked with other car companies and did very well, and then went to work with other big American companies and became very famous, did a lot of seminars. And Deming had some revolutionary ideas. But instead of them just being based on hearsay and what he thought might work, they were really based on kind of a more scientific method. Try the thing out, apply it, see the results that you're getting. If they work, keep them, develop them. And if they don't, throw them out. And he liked to measure the results of what he was doing. He liked to measure the process. And if you ever see a cover of Deming on the cover of one of his books, he's got this huge dome piece. I mean, he must have been the smartest person that's ever lived. I mean, it's like the cranium came out like an extra inch over here. And if you ever hear him talk, he was just amazing. So let's talk a little bit about thinking in systems. Thinking in systems. And I bring up thinking in systems because I've realized that if you're going to grow a large, successful company, at some point, it's going to cross a threshold where you can no longer keep all of the processes in your head. You can't keep track of everything that's going on, and you need to do something to roll those up into higher order processes that you can then interpret, and you can go from having something that looks like the cockpit of a 747 to a steering wheel and a gear shift again, so that you can drive the thing again instead of trying to figure out how this whole thing operates. And in order to do that, systems thinking can be very useful. So let's talk about what systems thinking is. In my view, systems thinking is looking at a group of interacting parts, entities, this stuff that's all interacting together, and instead of looking at the individual pieces, looking at what emerges when they interact, looking at the whole system, what's produced by the whole system. Rob Kelly, one time we were having a conversation, and he said, a lot of business people, they get stuck in the minutia, in the details of a process, and they get too caught up in, well, maybe we should tweak this thing, or maybe we should do this one little thing, maybe we should do this other little thing. Maybe if we tweak this, it'll whatever. And he said, they don't zoom out and just say, okay, if you pour some money in the top, what comes out the bottom? If If you pour $100 in the top, how much comes out of the end of the system? And look at it that way to start. It's actually a very important and brilliant observation. Most people don't look at the whole system. So when you're thinking about systems, there are some important pieces. And I want to share a few of those with you and hopefully teach you about them in a way that isn't too confusing, because sometimes this stuff can come across as complex. The first element, and the one that I've found to be maybe the most interesting in systems thinking, is physical variation. Physical variation. And physical variation is a phenomenon that happens whenever you run something out here in reality where we live. There are all these forces like gravity and air and people getting in fights and snowstorms and whatever else that affect things. Things don't always go the way that we want them to go. There's variation in any process. And you can even take something like a machine that stamps out a certain amount of a part on a metal press, and bam, it just stamps those things out. And you can chart every day, if you run the thing for 8 hours, how many of the part it stamps out, and every day there will be a different amount. And if you chart it on a chart, and it's a very stable system, it'll still have variation. And sometimes it'll go way down. Why? The machine broke that day, and they had to call from out of town and get the part. And one day it's way up. What happened? Oh, well, there was a heat wave and the air conditioner went off, and it turns out that that particular type of machine is much more productive when it's hotter, but it also burns the machine out faster. And you don't know all this stuff if you're not charting. And what Deming would do is these experiments. He had one called the red beads that was fascinating, where he had this bowl full of beads, and some of them were white and some of them were red, and he had this paddle with these indented things, and you'd dip the paddle in there and you'd pull it out, and there were an equal amount of red and white beads in there. And let's say that there were 10 indented spaces on the paddle, and he'd have the person count them up, and he'd treat them as if they were producing work that day. And so, at one point, they'd, come out with 7 red beads and 3 white ones, and he'd say, "You've been bad today. You produced bad results. Too many red beads. So we're going to give you a demotion. We're going to punish you and lower your pay because you produced 7 red beads." And they'd dip it in again, and they'd pull it out. And this time, there'd be, 4 red beads and 6 white ones. And he'd say, "Oh, good, your performance is much better. We'll give you a raise today." Something like 95% of the results that your business or any system is producing are because of the system, not because of the people. It's because of the system. And when there's variation, it's because of the system that you created in one way or another, not because of the people. So physical variation exists, and it's important to track your key metrics on a visual graph so you can see that, and then you can use a cool trick called running a moving average through it. And in Excel, this is super hard, because what you do is you right-click on the chart, and then you say, add moving average. And if you really can't figure out how to do that, you go into the help menu, and it'll take maybe like 4 minutes to do it instead of the 1 minute that it would take by right-clicking on it. And when you run a 7-day or a 15-day or a 30-day moving average through your numbers, you can go, look at that. It is a stable process. It's not as wild and crazy as it looks. So you have to smooth physical variation because it always happens in any real-world system. Another interesting aspect of systems is that short-term and long-term results are often very different. Short-term and long-term results are often very, very different. I'll get into some specifics on these in just a little bit. There's one in terms of motivation I want to tell you about that might change your perspective on how to motivate people a little bit later. Here's another one that I like. In a system, you never do just one thing. So a lot of times what we try to do in our business system is something's screwed up over here, and we want to tweak that thing so that we fix it. And as soon as we fix it, we go, okay, everything's good. And we don't say, now everyone watch for other effects that are going to come because I'm going to change part of the system. And you do a tweak over here, and it fixes your website and it runs smoother, but all of a sudden your refunds go up by 20%, and you never connect the two because you weren't looking for it. And you don't realize that all of these things are connected. And when you start thinking in short and long-term results, you also start looking further upstream for things. So in systems, you never do just one thing. All systemic changes have side effects. Any change that you make to the system will have some side effect somewhere that you didn't anticipate. And so one of the things that I like to do is whenever I'm going to change anything is try to let as many people know as possible and say, I'm going to change something over here. I'm going to change what our marketing says. Over in customer service, tell me what the customers are saying because we're going to change the marketing. Over in sales, how are the numbers looking once we change this thing? Everyone's got to be on the same page. Why? Because if you have a disconnect and you miss the side effect, it can hurt you. It can damage you. Another interesting part about systems is that, and I learned this from Deming, once a system becomes stable, it becomes very difficult to change. And this is especially important with people, because people are systems. We are very complex systems. So as an example, if you're a golfer and you start playing golf and you track your golf games statistically, and you start out and you're shooting, in the hundreds and change, and you start getting better and better and better, if you ever reach a point where you flatten out and you become stable for a long time, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to get back on the growth path. You got to keep going. You got to keep that system changing, because once it becomes stable, it's very hard to change. So once someone has gotten stuck, or once someone has gotten trained wrong in your business, very hard to change. Another thing that my mentor Jerry taught me, he said, character is a stable system. A person's character is a stable system, meaning very hard to change. I remember hearing Jack Welch tell a story about how he was out playing golf with someone that was a high-level manager at GE. And he saw the guy cheat. He saw him do something like, walk over and drop the ball on the green or something, and he was kind of like that. He just cheated. And he said, I think he went back on Monday morning and fired the guy. And he said, if he's going to do it there, he's definitely going to do it over here. Character is a stable system. You've probably heard, I think Gandhi said, I don't remember the quote, but what he basically said is, my life is my message. Everything that I do is integrated. They're all the same thing. And you'll find that's the same about people. If you get someone that's taking shortcuts and living on the edge, that's what they're going to do. And you got to just deal with that. If you find someone that's super conservative and pessimistic, that's probably just what they're going to do. It's how they're wired. If there's anything to hear of what I just said, it's don't let variation freak you out. Chart it visually. If you have an up sales day, do not go, yeah, great. Because it's very likely that you're going to have a down one tomorrow, and then you're going to be like, Don't let your emotions be whipsawed. Smooth, chart daily. And the other thing is, expect side effects and expect the long-term results to be different from the short-term results. Expect that. When you have a big win, grab your team and say, all right, everyone, we just had a big win. This is the time when we need to be most careful, because this is when we're all going to be cocky, when we're all going to be too sure of ourselves, we're all going to just miss any signs of danger that are coming. Think Titanic here. I was talking to my girlfriend the other day, and she was saying that a friend of hers knows a woman who's 1,000,000 years old, and I know it was 97 years old or 100 years old or something like that. She had I think she actually died a few years ago, but anyway, she had a ticket for the Titanic, and she saw a newspaper article that said, "The ship that even God couldn't sink." And as soon as she saw it, she went and sold her ticket and lived to tell about it, right? So watch out for those kind of things, because there are always side effects, and there are always unexpected results. I brought this back around to the two mistakes that we make unconsciously, actually to protect ourselves automatically: emotional estimation and seeing only validation. And one of the ones that I see people do all the time is plan how they're going to tweak a system and then plan how it's going to perform after they tweak it. They've got it all figured out. Well, I'm going to go and change my website, and then all of a sudden this is going to work better. Or I'm going to make this change to my product, and 50% more people are going to buy. With logic, they're planning how the system is going to respond. You do not want to do that. You want to hook the whole system up, run it, see how it responds, and then say, now I think I understand how this is going to respond. Right? So test, model, project. And then the other one, seeing only validation. We humans are a funny group. Whenever something goes well, we love to say, yeah. And whenever something doesn't work out, we go, man, you really screwed that up, didn't you? That's just what we do, naturally. We always want to associate ourselves with success and dissociate ourselves with anything that's not successful. And if you're interpreting all of the positive changes that you have in your business as being skill, yeah, it was my skill that did it, and all the negative things that happen as being bad luck, you're probably missing out on reality, probably missing the boat. So get a little more real with your bad self. Deming also talked about these two important pillars of a business. This is kind of moving up to the next level. And these are paradoxical, all right? So he talked about a concept that he called constancy of purpose, and then he talked about another concept that he called never-ending improvement. So one thing is constant, and one thing is changing. And they're like the two ends of, a Parthenon that hold up the superstructure or something. Constancy of purpose is figuring out those elements that are your core, the strategic elements, so to speak. And never-ending improvement is figuring out how to do that stuff faster, more efficiently, better, more streamlined, more profitably. And if you don't have both, you're going to change all the stuff that you shouldn't be changing, or you're going to be doing things the way you've always done them with everything. So it's key to identify what are the things that we never want to change. And then it's key to identify what are the things that we are going to constantly improve on a never-ending basis. Southwest Airlines, they're probably going to always stick with low-cost airfare. Right? Low cost, that's it. They've standardized their fleet of planes, their strategy is cemented. But they're probably always going to improve the experience that the customer has while they're getting that low-cost airfare. Does that make sense? You can have one part of the strategy that doesn't change, and yet you can have never-ending improvement. And you need to be clear on what both are. And if you don't know what they are, and you don't talk about them, guess what? Your stars are going to grab stuff and move it around. They're going to change things you didn't want changed. They're going to keep things the same you didn't want to keep the same. So you got to know what those are internally as a business. Humans, as I mentioned, are also systems. We are very complex systems, and we do not respond logically. I don't know if anyone's noticed that. Have you ever had the conversation in your head that you're going to have with another person? You get it all figured out. You got it all wired. Okay, here's what I'm going to say. Here's what they're going to do. And then you get there, and the person doesn't behave the way that the machine in your mind behaved. It never works out that way. So don't do that. Stop planning how other people are going to respond to what you say logically. They're complex systems. So I talked earlier about one of my favorite examples here in terms of systems, to open your mind a little bit. And it's the concept I want to talk about is incentives, incentivization. Incentives, in my personal opinion, are one of the most dangerous ideas ever to hit business. Incentives. I recommend that if you're going to use them, that you be very careful with them and you pay a lot of attention to what happens when you use them. Test them, see what happens, tread very lightly. And here's why. I haven't ever heard about a system to take people that don't have any intrinsic motivation and quickly give it to them so that they just turn into people who are now intrinsically motivated and want to make everything happen. I'm sure you can do it over time with processes, and I have seen it with people. But I have heard of experiments where you can quickly kill intrinsic motivation. David Ogilvy, all right, now I'm going to go off onto another track for a sec, tangent. One of my examples that I love to use, David Ogilvy, and Ogilvy on Advertising talks about how advertising can unsell customers. You can spend money on ads that makes them not buy. No one's ever thought of that. Right? Alan, who works on our team, one time we were talking about lawsuits, and he has a lot of legal experience. He said, when people sue other people, they typically only think that there's upside. That's it. So if someone sues you, they're probably thinking, the only thing I can get is something good out of this. Worst I have is maybe I could lose some legal expenses. And so he says, it's one of the reasons why a lot of attorneys, standard practices, whenever there's a lawsuit, they file an aggressive countersuit, whether or not it's reasonable. Why? Because in probably most cases, the person who thought, I've only got upside, immediately says, oh, wait a minute here. You mean there's a potential of me losing $10 million? Maybe we should be more reasonable about this and talk about this as adults. So here's the experiment that I read about. And I'm just going to summarize it, sum it up for you. They had a room with some coloring books and some crayons. And they put some kids in the room. And they said, here are some coloring books, here are some crayons. If you color a picture, we'll give you a gold star. And a lot of times in school, gold stars are used as the little reward, right? The dinging bell or the treat if you do a good thing. And so the kids colored away and they got their gold stars. Then they had another group of kids that came into the room and they gave them the coloring books and the crayons, and they said, we're going to leave you alone in here, do whatever you want. So the kids found the coloring books and the crayons and they colored because it looked like something that was interesting to do. Then they took the two groups and they put them back into a room with coloring books and crayons, but they didn't offer any incentives, no gold stars. The kids who were previously offered the gold star, if they colored, came into the room with the crayons and the coloring books, the coloring books and the crayons, and they left them alone. They weren't interested. Something about connecting an incentive to an intrinsic motivation changes it inside of us. So you have to be really careful, because let's say you have someone on your team and let's say they're doing a great job doing something because they love to do it. And then you say, you know what, I'll tell you what, from now on, every time you complete a successful one of those things that's your project, I'm going to give you an extra $100. Is it possible that you could be killing their intrinsic motivation by adding some little doggy treat at the end? I don't know, but I've seen this kind of thing happen enough, and I've watched the downside of incentives affect enough businesses that I'm very cautious with them. So when you think to yourself, okay, well, I'm just going to incentivize my team, and I'm going to say, you, if you get this done, you get this reward, and you, if I get this done, you get this reward. How are you going to ever know whether or not they would have done it on their own? How are you going to figure it out? Now you're stuck. There is no test after that. You can't say at the end, okay, I'm taking the incentive away. Now just do whatever you want to do and expect them to do it. Because someone that is, you with me? I don't know if you've ever been involved with a company that changed their commission process on their salespeople. That doesn't usually go over very well, right? Anyone ever had that happen to you? It just leaves you with that feeling like, once someone gets something, it's theirs forever. That's it. It just gets integrated in and it's theirs forever. So I try to really stay away from incentivization type stuff, because the first type of behavior that it creates is, how do I work the system? How do I game the system to get what I want to get out of it? There was a story in Wheeler's book, Understanding Variation. If you want to get a short course on this stuff, read Understanding Variation by Wheeler. Understanding Variation. He told a story in there, it's been years since I've read it, so I'll probably screw it up, but you'll get the gist of it, about a company that they were manufacturing, I don't remember what they were manufacturing, widgets, and they had boxes of them that rolled off the factory floor,